morning, everyone. Um, wow, such an imposing title, right? But let's start with presenting a bit myself. I'm Ludovico from Italy. Not many people from Italy around here. Maybe it's because we have a lot of machinery industry, and this is more of a software conference. So I'm a tech writer. I write, I study, I doodle a lot, and work for a company that does technical documentation for a lot of other companies in the machinery sector, in the medical sector, and we deal with a lot of physical products as opposed to software. So what follows today is not a technical review, it's not going to be a scientific report, and it's probably not going to be one of those clean-cut, learning experiences. I think it's going to feel more like following a herd. So a herd of ideas that was basically set free to do their thing, and they were inspired by the theme of this year. Or you could say in more businessy words, it's going to be a perspective on what outflows from putting together the concept of content and the concept of code. So at first, the parallelism between these two words seemed pretty natural. I mean, after all, we all spend the best hours of our days punching data into machines, right? So we're all information workers. What's the difference, right? But then suddenly, one night, a thought crept in, and I started to wonder, if programmers write for machines and technical writers write for humans, does that make me a programmer of humans? Like, is that even possible? Just how far can you push this parallelism? And just for the sake of argument, would it be possible to develop some kind of brain API that will allow us to interact with each other and with ourselves in such a clear and concise and unique way that will basically allow us to bring out all this dark art of emotional relations out in the open and basically well written in a piece of reference documentation? For you see, underneath this topic, there's a relationship that's been going on for quite some time now. And to me, it kind of visualizes as a zipper, that it's getting closer and closer over time until the two sides inevitably become one. Or is it? After all, when we put together the idea of humans and machines, the first thing that comes to mind is some kind of grim and dystopic future where a mysterious higher power takes control of all of us, in such subtle and pervasive ways that we wouldn't even know what was going on. And, this not knowing is the actual definition of fear of the future. But, let's just get a little off topic for a bit, if, there is such a thing. And let's just get some context, just, so that we can talk about a few concepts freely. And as Bill Gates once didn't say, context is king. So, you all have heard of the legends about mechanical clanking beasts, and multi-story computers. And depending on how you define them in their mechanical, electrical, electromechanical, and maybe even hydraulic and digital form, these things have been around for quite some time now. But what we're mostly interested in today is not their shapes, sizes, or inner workings, but it's our relationship with them. And so, as with most things, the first contact was tactile, like imagine using an abacus, right? And this could possibly be the first form of computer that we've ever dealt with. But it is with more abstract mathematics that things really started to get a lot interesting, but also more abstract and a lot more complex. It wasn't, so you could do a lot more stuff and a lot much cooler stuff with computers, but you still needed like a PhD in mathematics just to do the most basic stuff, and then you needed to put that into machine code. So that didn't really make for a smooth relationship. At some point, someone decided that it was time to fix that, and we can actually trace this back to Grace Hopper, an American computer scientist and United States Navy Rear Admiral, quite a lady, right? So she, in the 1950s, she pretty much single-handedly laid down the foundations for what we consider now the first compiler that would translate English words into machine code And nowadays this seems like a no-brainer, right? Because how else would you do it? Like you wouldn't, write machine code, right? But back then it was quite a big deal. In fact, allowing English to be converted into machine code meant removing a lot of friction, making computing much more popular, and also making higher level of abstractions a lot more reachable. In fact, as a direct consequence of this, we got COBOL. I don't know if many of you know this, but it was basically the first the first programming language that had the characteristics of portability that we take so much for granted nowadays. So you know how they say that if debugging is the process of removing software bugs, then programming must be the process of putting them in, right? Yeah, you probably already do that. So imagine debugging that. So this pile of code over here is the Apollo 11 in-flight software. Quite awesome, right? And that lady there is Margaret Hamilton, and she was the leader of the team of developers that made the software. And that software over there had some pretty nice cutting-edge features, like some error handling. So let's travel a bit with that software for a minute, and let's imagine being in the Apollo 11 lunar module. So you've been floating in space for 4 long days, and yet, only 4 days ago, you were being pushed out of the atmosphere at 30,000 kilometers per hour by over 3,000 tons of steel and fuel. But now, right now, you're handling the controls of the module, maneuvering the vehicle for the descent. You're 4 minutes in, total silence around you, and the whole world is watching you. You're almost there, until suddenly you hear, beep. So you look at the frozen display and you just see 1202. Like, what? What does that even mean, right? What kind of relationship is that? So later, Neil Armstrong would say something like, we couldn't look it up, we were kind of focused on watching where we were going, as you would, landing on the moon. Yeah, so it took some real-time node scanning and a lot of risk management from the Houston crew, and then maybe a little bit of gambling as well. But this error just turned out to be an ignorable error, fortunately. And it was caused by a mistake in the landing procedure. So no one reads manuals anyway, right? Okay. But what does this have to do with technical writing? Well, it's of extreme relevance, in fact, because you see the stories of technical writing and the stories of programming are all related to the general narrative of the way that we deal with information and with the tools that we use to handle this information. Or you could also say the tools that we use to let information handle us. Because you see, it's always a two-way relationship, right? And the people who push the boundaries, the people who ask the questions and made the tools and the methods that we use today to write for machines or for people, they didn't do this to enslave us or to make us obsolete. In fact, they did it, and we are all doing it, because we want to achieve something greater, because we want to get to know something more about ourselves. In fact, if you want to encode something, first, it must be perfectly clear to you. But let's get back to our original question. So, is tech writing just like code? Well, you could say that tech writing pretty much consists of the following, right? You can take real-world complex systems and turn them into simple mind models. You give out imperative and declarative instructions. And you take information and you package it and handle it in modules, blocks, and file formats. You apply metadata to it. And I guess you could pretty much say the same thing about programming, maybe with a less sugar intake on the side of the human involved, We can also extend this parallelism to tools and methods, and we're talking about the usual suspects here. So you got versioning, and we've seen how we can apply the same thing to, and all the pipelines, we can apply the same things to software and tech writing. We got frameworks because, yeah, you have a lot of JavaScript frameworks coming out every month. But we have frameworks for language as well, right? We got Simplified Technical English. We got a lot of domain-specific frameworks. You got editors, reuse, design patterns, call-up tools, all kind of dependencies, or what you expect your users to know already when they read your documentation. You got linting, as in reports on how you write and how well you're writing for your audience, and all that sort of stuff. But when we get to the point of consumption of this content, that's where things start to change. Because at that point, the pinky soapy point, so you got machines on the one hand and humans on the other hand, right? So it makes for a pretty stark contrast. So let's just talk a bit about these two subjects here. So machines are by nature submissive, right? They do pretty much what they are told to do, and for this reason, they rely on very precise pieces of information. Yeah, you can give them some wiggle room, you can abstract a bit more and maybe allow for some error handling, but they pretty much rely on data models that must be strictly enforced. And if not, otherwise we are talking about something else and not machines, right? Humans, on the other hand, well, we can fill in the gaps between scattered pieces of information, and we can come up with patterns even when there are none. And this causes a lot of chaos and introduces margins of bias and error and all sorts of chaotic stuff. Like imagine, chances are that a user, even if they cannot do a task correctly or they cannot do a task at all, they probably know how to do something very similar, or at least that kind of feels similar, right? And this can lead to all kind of consequences, which we can maybe talk about later, things catching fire and arms being chopped off, all sorts of stuff. But this is, of course, possible because we have two cognitive styles that we employ to interface and interact with the world. We have an L mode kind of style, and this is the rational linear stuff that gave us computers and rockets and tools and methods, all your mathematical stuff. We call it the L mode, as in the left part of your brain. Also, the L is kind of a shape that kind of reminds you of this rigid and more linear stuff. But then there is all this other stuff, and this, which is the non-rational, the non-linear stuff, and maybe we can call it the emotional side of you. And we will call it the R mode, as in, L, right, the other side. And this stuff does not give you computers, it does not give you rockets, it does not give you tools, but it makes you want to go to the moon. And so we saw how the two, writing and programming are getting closer and closer over time, and we saw we're sharing a main road made of stories and tools and methods. But right now it's clear that we need to get to two completely different places. Where are emotions in technical writing? What are you doing with the R side of your users? But you see, if a technical writer is the equivalent of a compiler for humans, we must address these questions. Or otherwise, at some point, the code will just not be enough anymore. It will not suffice. It will be like, having a giant computer with a huge portion of resources just left unused. And, it's not like you can just shut it off and save power, right? And keep it in silent hibernation. Because this R mode of ours, it doesn't just remain dormant. So what it does is, it lingers in the dark and waits for input. And if it doesn't get any, it probably just makes it up, right? And that's when it can actually start to sabotage you in the real world. So that's a German expression that was coined at some point in the 1600s. And this is the Nuremberg funnel. Sorry, Anton, for the pronunciation of the city, but Nuremberg is a German city. And it was the idea, or you could say more of a joke, really, that you could teach pretty much anything to anyone without almost any effort on the side of the pupil, and almost without any effort on the side of the teacher, or in our case, it could be a machine, right? So this, of course, hints at a lot of forceful teaching of someone's ideas or ideologies. And I mean, does this remind you of something? It was quite clear in the 1600s, and it's even clearer now, that this is not the way your brain works. In fact, it's quite clear that in humans, L mode is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So any form of futuristic brain API will not just have to employ the rational, linear way that we saw, that belongs to the L mode, because you're not programmable. You're not as programmable as a machine. So how can we extend the focus from, the narrow focus of interactions that we keep in this L mode to include all the other stuff that's going on in the R mode? Well, it is possible that machines will allow us to do this in the very near future. And so imagine, for instance, having an emotional AI engine hungry for information that you can just feed, and then this engine will just turn all your information into a content that has a high absorption, high retention, that is much more clear, that your users will understand much better because it's contextualized to them. And this engine will also have to be self-improving, right? Because machines that are self-improving will have to have an additional emotional dimension to them. You could say almost some pride to what they're doing, so they can just continue to improve and improve. So we're talking about an emotional AI here. So basically everything you write will just be fed in, and at some point you will just not have to teach people how to do something, but you will have to tell this to a machine. And then the machine will just take care of all the boring stuff, like, telling people how to do stuff. No, more like, follow standards, localize content, profile users, teach a few things while cracking jokes in the meantime, that kind of stuff. It's also possible, of course, that we as technical writers will be called upon to change our writing style and become more emotional. So if this will be the case, it will be quite interesting to see what kind of frameworks we come up with to reuse concepts and maybe reuse the same metaphorical scaffoldings to replicate complex word systems into simple mind models. And, like imagine writing procedural games instead of rigid sets of instructions. Or imagine conveying complex systems and making them into mind models using imagery or metaphors instead of diagrams and schemes. So there's some stuff going on in this field. As far as machines are concerned, we can see this in their inception with some voice interfaces like Alexa and Duplex. Of course, we're talking about real basic stuff, but the idea is there. And as far as humans are concerned, well, I'm sure you're all experimenting in your own gardens, and some people are experimenting with some stuff. A few months ago, I stumbled across Tatamic. I don't know if any of you knows this. It's like a framework that allows you to build your own web CMS based on PHP. And so Jack, the guy who writes the docs, he just sprinkles humor all over the place, and it just makes for a very entertaining experience reading the docs. So there are a few examples that I wanted to share with you today. You see, he does stuff like this, like follow these rules blindly and you'll be just fine. Break them and you're on your own, kind of humor, or like stuff like it's a Google thing, colloquialism. And then when you have to keep some files together, he tells you, they're best friends, don't separate them, conveys the meaning with some imagery. So this doesn't really come out of nowhere, of course. He says, and I'm quoting for a brief exchange that we had, after more than a decade of trying to read documentation and wanting to flip a table every time because I was so bored, distracted, or confused, I decided that my docs would, if nothing else, be fun to read. So from this statement, we almost get the feeling that he doesn't really care about the quality of the content as long as it's fun to read, right? Because it's like, okay, you need to get content on the stage, but you need to get on the stage first, right? And then you have to get your users to read your documentation. So I thought it was kind of an interesting take on this. Of course, the content is actually of quality. You know, it's not like he just writes jokes and all that. Other and deeper changes in this paradigm and shifts in paradigm will probably be fueled by deeper and changes in technology that are probably out of our control, like better augmented reality that will include not just sight, but also touch, hearing, and all the other senses. Like a few months ago, I tried an augmented reality set that was giving you vibrations when you were doing something wrong. And that was shocking because, yeah, of course, we've been playing with PlayStation like since we were kids, right? But it's not the same thing when you're like trying to change a tool on a machine in an augmented reality set and you kind of feel the shock. It's, it makes for a different experience. At the same time, better artificial intelligence, reading biometrics and interpreting intentions and emotions, you name it. So in our field, we often get the feeling that users are frustrated by the quantity of warnings and a lot of information that shouldn't be there. Because, some information is there just because it must be. And, after all, how many times do you have your manager tell you something like, no, this piece of information must be there because it's always been there, right? And legal department tells me that I have to put it there. You cannot edit it because otherwise, who knows what happens, right? So there you go. You got frustration. But at the same time, users still expect to play around with the product safely. And then if things get rough, they want to fall back on documentation to fix their problems, to get out of the rough spots, right? So this is an expectation on the side of the users that we've probably been put in there over time. Now imagine a future when this expectation will rise even more. Like soon a user may not just expect to have been told to do something in a certain way, but they may actually have to want to feel that they have been conditioned to do something in a certain way. Like imagine, on the one hand, sifting through pages and pages of warnings and procedural instructions, and then having to put in all the effort that it takes to understand what has been written and make the mind models. And then, on the other hand, on the other side, all the time it takes to localize and make sure that you write in a correct way and clear way. And on the other hand, imagine just having the feeling of what is the right thing to do with your product. Because you have the perfectly functioning mind model with you, and you just have the complete picture. So you feel what is the right thing to do. Well, sci-fi? Maybe. Maybe, I think it's more like, going to the moon. One thing is certain, that we are building the technology to, fill in the gap and close the zipper. But what will this relationship look like? Will it be an oppressive relationship? Will it be a new era of clarity and transparency between humans and machines? Well, we will just have to see, I guess. There's no way in trying to predict the future, right? It's what we will make of it. But some people think that if we could actually understand every aspect of the learning process, we would be able to manipulate people, like cogs. But we will never be able to do this, because if we could, we would be able to understand life itself to the full. So either way, it kind of looks promising, right? So, after all this journey and following this herd around, we saw a lot of accomplishments being made by humanity. We went to the moon, we built computers, we went from the abacus to this huge clunking beast to your smartphones. There's one thing that really, 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 really struck me. And I don't know, I've seen yesterday that you all know Netflix, right? So you probably watch a lot of stuff in there. I don't know if you watched Lost in Space, the new TV show that they remade from the old one. And there's a family, the Robinson's family, they're stranded on a foreign planet with a lot of technological marvels at their disposal. They got emotional robots having breakdowns, They got black holes popping up all over the place. So you would expect technical documentation of the ship to be I don't know, in God knows what kind of format and be delivered in such a brilliant way, right? Well, they still have those 300-page PDFs that we want so desperately to get rid of. But who knows how they were written, though? Maybe they're just full of doodles. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, questions? Do you have any? I can't really say. Okay, here's one.
Sorry, can I ask a question to Raphael first? I just wanted to say, how much do you save on soap every year? Like, from the questions that you get.
How many do you have already?
6 soap.
6
okay.
soaps.
All right.
He's like collecting our soaps for the entire year, for the entire family, to wash their hands with it. Yeah.
Somehow it makes me think of Full Metal Jacket, Okay.
Yeah, you're famous for that. Thank you for the question.
No problem.
Okay, but we actually have a question to you.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Paula. I'm from Nokia. I have a question regarding this proposition for emotional technical writing.
Yes.
What chance is there of this actually becoming a thing? My question comes from my personal experience. We've been experimenting with this at our company, and there's a massive resistance. There's this lingering conviction that documentation needs to be boring. It has to be boring, otherwise it's not professional enough. Yeah. So that's my question.
Yeah, of course, it's a very good point. And earlier, someone was mentioning also simplified technical English as a framework of reference for writing. And they were saying how you can actually use rhetoric instead of simplified technical English. I can actually also extend this and say, how can you be emotional using simplified technical English? Or better, you are being emotional. People are feeling like they're being treated as stupid people, right? So this means that you can convey emotions with intentions most of the times. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to be a matter of limitations, as in, when you have such strong drives, nothing is going to stop this thing, we are being exposed to technology that is constantly trying to sip in our attention by attracting us with emotional relations. And we've seen this recently with the, Google Assistant, and Amazon has recently launched a bracelet that tries to read your emotion. So I think it's just a matter of time. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of resistance, of course, because you got your hype thing, your hype curve going on. So once we get through that, it's just going to be natural, I think.
Okay, thank you.
We can afford one more question, if there is one. Yes, there is one more.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Anna from Quadient, from the Czech Republic. I have a question also related to the emotions and conveying emotions in the documentation. Personally, I am kind of, I don't want to say resistant, but I am not exactly in favor of that. And the reason is that I'm afraid that I know different people have different kinds of humor, and what you might find funny, somebody else might not. I know that my sense of humor is very specific, and literally only me and my father laugh when we tell jokes. Nobody else in the room does. So I would be too afraid and scared to even try to use my humor in my technical writing, because I would be thinking, they're all going to think I'm terrible and stupid. Why do I even put it there? So my question is, do you think it would also cause problems like this? Maybe, creating problems in terms of understanding, because people would become frustrated trying to filter all the jokes they might not find funny for the actual information they're trying to reach. Documentation.
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, clarity is, the top priority of technical documentation, one of the top priorities. And when jokes and emotions and that kind of stuff gets in the way of clarity of delivering the content, of course, it's going to be messy, right? So, which is why I think there are going to be two sides working at different speeds here. People like Jack from Statamic, he can write jokes because he knows his audience, because he was on the other side for such a long time, right? And he probably looks at people in the face, and so he knows that most of the people get it, right? But other people, we probably just have to continue writing in the same way, just making sure that an emotional engine will add another layer afterwards. And I know this sounds kind of weird, but if you think about it, you're being profiled right now. You're here, you're surrounded by people who have preferences, and probably, with the GPS location turned on, someone can actually tell what kind of people you prefer to interact with, right? And what kind of humor you share. It's just a matter of putting the data together and collecting enough, of course, and making sense of it. And I think we will get past this universality once we manage to tailor information in this way and tailor emotions in this way.
Okay, thank you.
One last. Okay, let's make it quick. There's one last question. Yep.
I actually have a comment on your question, on your last question. So I work for a company called Travis CI, and it's kind of known for this friendly tone and a little bit playful even, and this shines through within the application, in the marketing content, even how people respond to support questions. And I think when you have this style and tone, I think that's how you can get away with using a little bit of that in documentation. That would be my thinking around it. Yeah, sorry, not a question.
Thank you for sharing. One last. I'm not in control anymore.
It's the illusion of control that gets you.
It's, yeah.
Hi, it's Daniel from Nokia, and I was wondering if you have some response from customers, if the humorous documentation is good for them. Of course, I think this would be really hard to implement as well, because not everybody is like a very funny person, and sometimes it's really like you're writing a documentation and then, okay, I can do better, I can make a better joke, and then you're erasing your text and writing again. So I think it may be hard. Yes.
So you're asking about feedback from customers?
Yeah, if you know about
okay.
feedback.
Well, to be honest with you, this is all still in the, for me at least, it's in the experimental stage, because we are where I work with, we deal a lot with machinery, so we have to follow a lot of regulations, and there's not really much room for that kind of stuff in there. But I found that when you break walls with people, things start to get smooth, and I don't imagine having comedy sketches written on PDF manuals when you have to replace something that if you have to do it in 15 minutes, otherwise everything will explode. Although maybe it can be fun to see where that gets you. Maybe in court. But at the same time, I'm talking about more like online stuff and less sensitive stuff, and I think we've already seen how this works much better for customer retention. And even just talking to Jack, he was very happy that I could share this today here with you, but he told me that he didn't really have any framework of reference and that everything is still a bit experimental for him, and he actually is trying to write a book about this. So I really hope that I will manage to get some customer feedback in the future about this, because it's something I want to get into, and I'm pretty sure there's something there. And I hope this feedback is not going to be a court case.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ludovico. It's really amazing to see you sharing with us.
Thank you.
Big applause, please.